The rain pelted against the windshield of Amy's old sedan, each droplet blurring the hazy glow of the streetlights. She adjusted her hood, frowning at the crack in the dashboard. It was nearly midnight, and she had one last delivery before she could go home. The order had come from the bad side of town, an area she usually avoided even during the day. But the tip promised to be generous, and she needed every dollar to keep her car running. Navigating the labyrinth of dilapidated streets, Amy finally arrived at the address, a crumbling apartment building that leaned precariously against the weight of time. The number 206 flickered weakly in neon green above the door. She parked the car, grabbed the bag of food, and hesitated. Something about the building felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting. "Amy, just drop it off and leave," she muttered, stepping into the cold night air. Her sneakers splashed in a puddle as she approached the entrance. The hallway inside smelled of mildew and something metallic. Light bulbs hung bare from the ceiling, their dim glow barely illuminating the peeling wallpaper. When she reached apartment 6B, she knocked twice and waited. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. From within, the sound of shuffling feet made her stiffen. The door creaked open just a crack, but she couldn't see who was behind it. "Amy, delivery," she said, forcing a polite tone. A pale hand shot out, holding a wad of cash wrapped in a stained napkin. The hand retreated as quickly as it had appeared, the door slamming shut in her face. Amy stared at the door, her skin prickling. Shaking off the unease, she opened the napkin to count the money, and froze. Nestled within the damp bills was a severed finger. Blood, fresh and glistening, soaked the edges of the napkin. The fingernail was painted a bright, garish red, chipped at the edges. Amy dropped the money and stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. The hallway seemed to close in on her. She turned and ran, the bag of food forgotten. Her sneakers squeaked against the floor as she burst through the front door and into the rain. She fumbled with her keys, glancing over her shoulder. The apartment building loomed in the darkness, its windows like hollow eyes. Finally, she managed to start the car and sped off, her hands trembling on the wheel. She drove aimlessly, her mind racing. Who would do something like that? And why? Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, startling her. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Hesitant, she picked it up. "Amy? Hello?" Heavy breathing filled the line. Then a low voice whispered, "You forgot your tip." Amy's blood ran cold. She threw the phone onto the seat and pressed harder on the gas. The streets grew darker as she veered away from the city center, heading toward the highway. But as she turned a corner, the engine sputtered and died. "Amy, no, no, no!" she cried, twisting the key in the ignition. The car refused to start. Rain hammered against the roof as she slammed her palms against the steering wheel. She reached for her phone to call for help, but the battery had drained to zero. A shadow moved in the rearview mirror. Amy's breath hitched. She turned around, squinting into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing. But then, slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall and thin, its movements were unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. It wore a tattered coat, and its face was obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Panicking, Amy locked the doors and rolled up the windows. The figure stopped a few feet from her car, tilting its head as if studying her. Then it raised a hand and tapped a single finger against the glass. "Amy, go away!" she screamed, her voice cracking. The figure didn't move. Instead, it began to circle the car, its long fingers dragging along the windows, creating a screeching sound that made her teeth ache. Amy couldn't sit there and wait. She grabbed her umbrella from the passenger seat, took a deep breath, and flung the door open. The figure was gone. She stepped out, scanning the rain-soaked street. Nothing. But as she turned to check the car's rear, the figure was suddenly there, inches from her face. Its breath was cold against her skin, and its eyes were like black holes, consuming the light around them. It reached for her, its long fingers brushing against her arm. Amy screamed and swung the umbrella, striking the figure's head. It staggered back, but there was no sound of pain, no reaction other than the tilt of its head. She didn't wait to see what it would do next. She ran, her shoes slipping on the wet pavement. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The streets seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. The sound of footsteps echoed behind her, steady and unrelenting. She ducked into an alley, pressing herself against the wall and trying to control her breathing. The figure passed by the entrance, its shadow stretching across the ground. She waited until it disappeared before creeping out, her heart pounding. Amy spotted a rusted fire escape ladder and climbed it, her hands slipping on the wet metal. She reached the roof and crouched behind an air conditioning unit, peering over the edge. The figure stood below, its head tilted up as if it could see her through the darkness. It began to climb. Amy searched frantically for a weapon. She found a loose pipe and gripped it tightly, her palms slick with rain and sweat. The figure's hat appeared over the edge of the roof, followed by its pale, gaunt face. As it pulled itself up, she swung the pipe with all her strength. The metal connected with its head, and the figure let out an inhuman screech. It fell back, landing on the ground below with a sickening crunch. Amy peered over the edge, her chest heaving. The figure lay motionless, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles. But as she watched, its body began to dissolve, black smoke curling into the air. Within moments, it was gone, leaving only the faint scent of burning wood. Amy staggered back, dropping the pipe. The rain continued to pour, washing away the blood on her hands. She sat on the roof, shivering as the distant sound of sirens filled the air. She didn't know if she'd ever be able to explain what had happened, but one thing was certain: she would never take another delivery to the bad side of town.